Good day, mates. Welcome to Strange History. Today, this podcast takes you on a thrilling ride through the wild and lawless era of the Australian Bushrangers. Together, we're going to dive headfirst into the daring tales and daring escapades of those who lived life on the edge. Join us as we saddle up and gallop through the pages of history where notorious bushrangers ruled the untamed Australian frontier. From Ned Kelly's ironclad defiance to Captain Thunderbolt's lightning-fast escapes, we'll unearth the stories that have become the stuff of legends. Get ready to walk in the footsteps of these larger-than-life characters as we explore their audacious heists, their heart-pounding chases, and the intriguing mysteries that surrounded their lives. But be warned, listeners, as we travel the rugged landscapes of the past, danger and excitement lurk around every Australian corner. So grab your Stetson hat, polish your spurs, and get ready to journey through the dusty trails of history. We're going to guide you through the world of lawbreakers and legends where justice was blurred and the spirit of rebellion burned bright. Australian folklore is a rich tapestry of stories, legends, songs, and traditions that have been passed down through generations in Australia. It encompasses a wide range of themes and topics reflecting on the diverse history, culture, and landscapes of the country. Bushrangers were outlaws who roamed the Australian bush. Famous figures such as Ned Kelly and Captain Thunderbolt became part of Australian folklore through their daring escapades and confrontations with the authorities. Bushrangers played a significant role in Australia's colonial history during the 18th and the 19th centuries. They were often seen as romanticized figures representing a rebellious spirit against authority and a symbol of the harsh conditions faced by early settlers. Origins of the term bushranger originally referred to escaped convicts who took to the Australian bush as outlaws. In the early years of European settlements in Australia, the penal colonies were characterized by strict discipline and harsh living conditions, leading some convicts to seek freedom in the wilderness. The first notable bushrangers emerged in the early 19th century. One of the most famous early bushranger was Matthew Brady. He was active in Tasmania from 1824 to 1826. Brady and his gang carried out robberies, cattle theft, and violent confrontations with settlers and authorities. The discovery of gold in the mid-19th century sparked a wave of bushranging activity. Many bushrangers turned to highway robbery, targeting gold escorts, travelers, and isolated settlements. The allure of quick riches and the challenging terrain provided ideal conditions for their activities. Perhaps the most renowned and controversial bushranger in the Australian history was Ned Kelly. Active in the 1870s, Kelly and his gang carried out a series of robberies, confrontations with police, and acts of defiance against the colonial authorities. The infamous Kelly gang's last stand occurred in 1880 at Glenrowan, where they wore homemade plate metal armor during a shootout with the police. Ned Kelly was captured, tried, and subsequently hanged in Melbourne. Bushrangers captured the imagination of the public, and their exploits became the subject of numerous folk songs, poems, and stories. Despite their criminal activities, some bushrangers were admired for their defiance against the authorities and their skill in evading capture. The decline of bushranging came about due to improved law enforcement efforts, the expansion of settlements and infrastructure, and the changes in public sentiment. The construction of railways, telegraph lines, and the establishment of police forces across the country made it increasingly difficult for bushrangers to operate undetected. The legacy of bushrangers continue to be a part of Australian folklore and popular culture. Their stories have been romanticized, depicted in literature, music, theater, and film. They represent a time of colonial struggles, hardship, and rebellious spirit that shaped the nation's identity. We're going to delve into a few stories highlighting the exploits of some notable bushrangers in Australian history. Ned Kelly, who we mentioned before, is perhaps the most famous and controversial bushranger in Australia. Born in 1854, Kelly and his gang included his brother Dan. They engaged in a series of audacious robberies and clashes with the police. One of the most infamous incidents was the Stringy Bark Creek Police Massacre in 1878, where the gang killed 3 police officers. The Kelly gang's last stand occurred during the siege at Glenrowan in 1880, which we again mentioned before. Ned Kelly, wearing his iconic homemade armor, faced off against the police, but was ultimately captured. He was tried and hanged in Melbourne Gaol. The story of Ned Kelly has been the subject of numerous books, movies, songs, cementing his place in Australian folklore. It is one of the most famous and enduring tales in Australian history. Ned Kelly was born in 1854 in Beveridge, Victoria, into an Irish immigrant family. His father, John Red Kelly, had a troubled past, often in conflict with the authorities. Ned Kelly's early life was marked by poverty and encounters with the law. Kelly's transformation into bushranger came after a series of events. In 1878, he was wrongfully accused of assaulting a police officer, leading to his first arrest and imprisonment. During his time in jail, Kelly became increasingly disillusioned with the police and the injustices he believed were perpetuated against his family and the Irish community. Following his release, Ned Kelly formed a gang consisting of his brother Dan Kelly, their friends Joe Byrne and Steve Hart. Together, they embarked on a series of daring robberies and confrontations with the police. The Kelly gang became famous for their distinctive suits of homemade armor, which they wore during their final showdown at Glenrowan in June of 1880. The gang took over the Glenrowan Inn, planning to derail a police train and use hostages as leverage. However, their plan failed when the police surrounded the inn. During the siege, Ned Kelly, wearing the iconic armor, engaged in a fierce gun battle with the police. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, he fought valiantly until he was shot in the legs and captured. The other members of the gang, his brother Dan, Joe Byrne, and Steve Hart, died in the shootout or by suicide. Ned Kelly was taken into custody and put on trial for his crimes. His trial was highly controversial, with many sympathizers seeing him as a symbol of resistance against oppression. However, Kelly was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. On November 11th in 1880, at the age of 25, Ned Kelly was executed at the old Melbourne Gaol. Ned Kelly's story has left a lasting impact on Australian folklore and identity. He's been both celebrated as a folk hero fighting for justice and condemned as a criminal. Next, we're going to talk about Captain Thunderbolt. You gotta love that name. Captain Thunderbolt, whose real name was Frederick Ward, was active as a bushranger in New South Wales during the 1860s and the 1870s. He earned the nickname Captain Thunderbolt due to his habit of announcing himself as Captain Thunderbolt during robberies. Thunderbolt was known for his daring escapes, using his knowledge of the rugged terrain to evade capture. He often targeted mail coaches in small settlements. His life as a bushranger came to an end when he was shot and killed by a police constable in 1870. The story of Captain Thunderbolt is another captivating tale in Australian bushranging history. He was active in the mid-19th century. He became one of the most notorious bushrangers in New South Wales. He was born in 1835 in Windsor, New South Wales. He grew up in a working-class family and had a relatively unremarkable early life. However, circumstances led him down a path of crime and bushranging. Ward's first brush with the law occurred in 1856 when he was arrested for horse theft. He served time in prison but was released in 1860. Shortly after, he married Mary Ann Bugg, a woman known for intelligence and resourcefulness. Together, they embarked on a life of bushranging. Taking on the alias Captain Thunderbolt, Frederick Ward and Mary Ann Bugg embarked on a series of audacious robberies and escapades. Thunderbolt was known for his charismatic personality and ability to evade capture. He often targeted mail coaches, travelers, and isolated settlements, using the rugged terrain of the New South Wales to his advantage. Thunderbolt's success as a bushranger can be attributed to his knowledge of the local landscape and his understanding of police tactics. He was skilled at eluding authorities, escaping into the dense bush, or disappearing into the rugged terrain. During his time as a bushranger, Thunderbolt developed a reputation for being more benevolent than many other outlaws at the time. He was known to share his loot with the poor and disadvantaged, earning him some sympathy from the public. Thunderbolt's reign as a bushranger lasted for nearly 7 years, from 1865 to 1870. He managed to evade capture numerous times. Despite constant pursuit by the police, he became a folk hero and a symbol of resistance against the strict colonial authorities. However, Thunderbolt's luck eventually ran out. On May 25, 1870, he was shot and killed by a police constable named Alexander Walker during a confrontation at Kentucky Creek, near Orala, New South Wales. Mary Ann Bugg, pregnant with Thunderbolt's child, was captured and later imprisoned, but was eventually released. Captain Thunderbolt's story has become part of Australian folklore, with his image as a charismatic and daring bushranger persisting to this day. His escapades and ability to outsmart the authorities have captured the imagination of the Australian public, ensuring his place in the history of bushranging in Australia. Next, we're going to talk about Ben Hall. The story of Ben Hall, an infamous Australian bushranger, is one that is marked by audacious robberies, narrow escapes, and a tragic end. Active during the 1860s, Ben Hall became one of the most renowned bushrangers in New South Wales. Born on May 9th in 1837 in Maitland, New South Wales, Ben Hall grew up in a family with a troubled history involving run-ins with the law. While Hall initially worked as a stockman and drover, circumstances and a series of events led him to turn to a life of crime. Hall's involvement in bushranging began in 1862, when he and his friend John Gilbert were accused of horse stealing. Fearing arrest, they took to the bush and formed a gang that included various members over time. Together, they carried out a series of daring robberies, mainly targeting travelers, mail coaches, and gold escorts. Hall's gang was known for its efficiency and organization, making them a formidable force. They would strike quickly, often employing disguises and ambushing their targets. Hall, regarded as a charismatic and often respected leader, earned a reputation for skillful horsemanship and ability to plan successful robberies. Despite their criminal activities, Hall and his gang were seen by some as champions of the poor, sharing their ill-gotten gains with the underprivileged. This, coupled with the fact that Hall had a reputation for avoiding violence whenever possible, led to a degree of sympathy from sections of the public. However, public sentiment began to turn against Hall when an innocent bystander, a policeman named Sergeant Edmund Perry, was shot and killed during a botched robbery. The incident increased pressure from the authorities to capture Hall and put an end to his reign of terror. In May 1865, the New South Wales government issued a substantial reward for the capture of Ben Hall. The police intensified their efforts, employing various strategies to apprehend him. Finally, on May 5th in 1865, a police party led by Sub-Inspector James Henry Davidson caught up with Hall's gang at Billabong Creek near Forbes. In the early morning hours, the police surrounded the bushrangers' camp. A fierce gunfight ensued, resulting in the death of John Gilbert. Hall, however, managed to escape into the darkness. Despite the setback, police continued with their pursuit of Hall. Approximately a year later, on May 5, 1866, Hall was ambushed and shot dead by a police party led by Sergeant Edward Morissette in the Goobang Creek area. He was just 29 years old at the time of his death. The story of Ben Hall has captivated the Australian public for generations. His life as a bushranger, marked by daring heists and encounters with the authorities, has been immortalized in books, songs, and films, cementing his place in Australian folklore and the history of bushranging in the country. Next, we're going to talk about the Clark brothers. The Clark brothers, John, who goes by Johnny Clark, and Thomas, who went by Tom Clark, were bushrangers active in the New South Wales region in the 1860s. They were notorious during the mid-19th century. They gained a reputation for their violent and ruthless behavior, and their story is marked by a series of crimes and confrontations with the law. The Clark brothers were born in the 1840s in the Lachlan district of New South Wales. They were raised by a family of stockmen who provided them with the skills and the knowledge of the bush that would later aid them in their criminal activities. Johnny Clark, the elder of the two, was known for his fiery temper and aggression. Tom Clark, on the other hand, was regarded as more of a level-headed and strategic person. Together, they formed a gang that included other members at various times. The Clark brothers targeted isolated settlements, travelers, and squatters. They often engaged in acts of violence, robbery, and intimidation. They were known to torture and even murder their victims, instilling fear in the areas they operated in. The gang's reign of terror lasted for several years, from the early 1860s until their capture in 1867. They evaded capture multiple times, thanks to their knowledge of the local terrain and the support they received from some sympathizers in the community. However, the Clark brothers' criminal activities and their increasing notoriety made them targets for the authorities. In April of 1867, a large police force, led by a renowned bushrange tracker, Sergeant Alexander the Terror Walker, apparently he got a nickname, surrounded the Clark brothers and their gang near Gindon, New South Wales. A gun battle erupted between the outlaws and the police. During the exchange, Johnny Clark was killed while Tom Clark managed to escape into the bush. However, he was soon arrested and captured. Both Tom Clark and other members of the gang were brought to trial. Tom Clark was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. He was executed on January 25th in 1868. Again, the Clark brothers' story has been widely documented and has become part of Australian bushranging folklore. Their violent and brutal nature set them apart from other bushrangers of the time. Their crimes and terror they inflicted on communities have left a lasting mark on the history of bushranging in Australia. These were just a few examples of stories surrounding Australian bushrangers. Their exploits, ranging from daring escapes to violent confrontations, have captivated the Australian imagination and continue to be retold and remembered in various forms of media. While bushrangers were often seen as outlaws, it's important to note that their actions were not universally celebrated or glorified. Their activities caused fear, harm, and loss for many people. They were regarded as criminals by the authorities of the time. The perception of bushrangers has evolved over the years, with more nuanced understanding of their historical context and the social conditions that led to their existence. This concludes this episode of Strange History. If you have an idea for an episode, please email me at strangehistorypod@gmail.com. This episode was produced by my favorite human being, Dead to Me Productions, and of course, thank you, Spreaker, from my heart, the best darn podcast host in the whole world. Love you guys. Peace out.
Yay!